Live, New York.
Saturday Night Live.
So welcome everybody to the second part of the teaching of Palestine, teaching for Palestine, that is sponsored.
And
Can we have it? We can make copies of it later.
Yeah, no, I just want to make sure that we get every man who is going, so people ask me. Okay, so we have a lot of people who were here in the first part of the teaching, and then I see some new faces, so that's really great. My name is Michelle Hartman, and I work in Montreal in Canada at McGill University. And so I have the role of being an active moderator. So I wanted to bring together a couple of things that came up in the first session this morning about the film 1948, Creation and Catastrophe, that Ahlam, Muhtasab, and Andy, I've also now forgotten Andy's last name. Just showed us parts of, which was really an amazing film. And so if you didn't get a chance to see any of the film, I'm going to underline the idea that everybody should try to see it or see parts of it, or go and screening on Monday that's going to happen in Washington, D.C. All right, so what I thought I was going to pick up, because we're really focused on teaching in this session and thinking about maybe how we would use some of the kinds of resources like that film, or how we think about it and how we frame when we talk about Palestine and teach about Palestine in the different places that we work, or the different places that we teach, and that's in classrooms and not in classrooms, and that's in lots of different kinds of places. And I was going to start with something that Roz Paczewski, who opened and moderated that first panel, said about kind of finding, working on this and teaching these kinds of things can be both very difficult, and it can make you, as a teacher, it can be really challenging. It's depressing. It can be very sad. It can also be really inspirational. And we saw kind of both of those things, I think, in the last session. That how do we kind of come to terms with that and think about that as teachers? And I wanted to pull together a couple of other things that came out about thinking about how we frame what we do, or how we think about what we do. And right at the end, or kind of near the end, one of the points that Rabab Abdulhadi, who really pulled together this teaching for us, made is about recentering. Who's at the center of the story? Who's at the center of what we do? And I think because of the way that we get sources, the way that we get documents, the way that we get the materials that we teach a lot of time, that can be kind of predetermined for us. And it's really easy to fall into teaching or working with material the way that it's given to you, rather than kind of thinking about, okay, well, where does this come from? How is this coming to me? How can I reframe it? Whose story am I putting at the center of what I'm doing? And for some of us and others of us, that might work differently. But I think that that's one I really wanted to start with, and think about, what we center and how we center things. And a couple of other things that I thought I would just start off with in the framing that came from last session, out of the film, and then the discussion that everybody did around that film, was thinking about how, if we're talking about teaching, how do we speak as teachers? How do we talk? How do we talk about what we're doing? So whose stories are at the center, and how we center certain stories? Like, can the colonized be at the center of a story of colonization rather than the colonizer, right? And how do we talk? So do we refer to settlements, or do we refer to colonies, right? That was brought up last session. Talking about 1948 as the Nakba, right? But also talking about the Nakba as something that's ongoing, something that started before 1948 and continues today. So I wanted to kind of bring that into our framing, and also thinking about, when we talk about what we're doing, and each one of us is making a small presentation, and I have some words from somebody who wasn't able to be here today, we're working in different places, we're in different relationships with those places, right? And we're in different positions vis-a-vis those places and vis-a-vis our students and the people who we're teaching. So how we take that into account, and also how we think about what's fair. So I thought that came out from the last session as well, thinking about, when we talk about presenting material that's fair or presenting material that's balanced, what does fair and balanced mean when we're in different places, right? So is it more fair to be thinking of your teaching audience as the person who's at the center of that film? Or should we always be thinking of our teaching audience as the so-called uninformed American, right? I, for example, in my teaching, don't think about my audience always as being the uninformed, average, so-called mainstream American. But that's something we can talk about, or how we might do that, or why we might do that or not do that in different kinds of settings, depending on who we are and where we're teaching and so on. So I wanted to kind of start off framing with those things, and we'll get into lots of those other questions as people make their presentations. But we have such a short time, so we're going to turn over, and we have Susan Greene, who...
I'm wondering if I might switch spots with someone, because we're still working.
Oh, you're still working on things? Okay, I was going to do you first because I thought once the technology's out.
Yeah, it's still not up yet.
Okay, so we're going to start today.
It's promising.
Maybe we'll have some time. Okay, so we had a participant who wasn't able to be here for a couple of reasons. And so she wrote some notes of what she wanted to present here today. So this is a person who is based here in New York. So for those of you who are based in New York, some of this will probably have more Tammy Gold. And she teaches at I'm looking up the notes here, she teaches at Khury.
At Hunter College.
At Hunter College, okay.
In Film and Media Studies.
And Film and Media Studies. So she wrote comments that she wanted to present today about why she thinks it's important to establish a Center for Palestinian Studies at Khury. And she was planning to propose this as a long-term project, a long-haul project that would need a lot of organizing, but her argument here is that we need to create a foundation for the study of Palestine in a public university in the United States that would offer a wide range of courses examining politics, literature, music, art, history, philosophy, and of course the Nakba and the current ramifications that the occupation has on the world political scene in the name of Palestinian studies. So organizing it around that rubric. And this center's area of work could be informed by growing scholarship and activist community around justice for Palestine. So she put a few areas of concern that she's looking at: history and political economy, labor economy, colonial settler relationship to Israel, culture and the arts, how Palestinians survive and prosper as a people and preserve their cultural identity under 60 years of occupation. And she is proposing that such a center could develop a media library, a collection of journals and archives, the things that would be necessary for research and scholarship. So she's suggesting that the Khury environment has a history that could be drawn on already. There is this Center for Puerto Rican Studies that came out of a long history and a long political struggle. So to be drawn on that experience and draw on that. And there is a new Center for Dominican Studies, a Dominican Studies Institute, and the Jaime Lucero Mexican Studies Institute. So there's 3 institutes or centers that have been set up out of political struggles that she's suggesting that we could draw on, which is a really interesting proposal for us to think about. And she said these institutes have created the needed foundation for serious research and study. And if we're going to teach Palestine, underline teach, we need this kind of resource to build an academic base for students and faculty and community groups. So she proposes that, so there's all these different elements of it, but that the struggle for creation of such a center itself would be a statement, and a lot, presumably, would also be learned from, creating that center as well. So she is contextualizing this in the within a context where teaching just one class at Palestine at Hunter and getting approval for it was a long struggle itself. So to try to think about, rather than taking kind of a partial approach or a piecemeal approach, to really go for something larger and an organizing principle like a center. So that's what she really wanted to share, and believes that at this important moment in the struggle to free Palestine, and the relationship that this occupation has with the United States foreign policy, this is a moment to do this work. So that's the contribution of Tammy Gold, who wasn't able to be here today, who's a professor at Hunter College here in New York. And I think that's an interesting thing to think about for all of us, and we can certainly talk about this more as we all come together in the discussion part, the kind of institutionalization of what we do, right? As we do things, I think for a lot of us who teach about Palestine, I teach in a university, we're so on the margins and so on the edges. As everybody knows, like sometimes you can do more there, but sometimes it's a different kind of work. So that what happens as you move that work, institutionalize it and move into different kinds of centers, and then also meet different kinds of resistance, and I guess we'll talk about that. How are we?
I think we're good.
In technology? Okay. So we're going to turn, so that's a contribution of Tammy Gold. This is Susan Greene, who's here from California. And I said to everyone they can introduce themselves more as they talk. Susan is an artist inside the context.
Very fancy television.
That's good, because people in the end so they can see that.
Anyway, I had the honor and privilege to first visit Palestine when I was 31 years old. That was in 1989. It was the first Intifada, and I had a very profound experience. Yes, okay, yes, sorry. I had a very profound experience that changed my life. Basically, I think the phrase is blew my mind. And so it's been an issue that I've been involved with ever since. And you know, the presentation earlier today, people were talking about meeting Palestinians who had lived through the Nakba, the catastrophe, and people would stop us in the street. And during that time, there really were not very many foreigners in the West Bank, and it was a closed military zone, so journalists had a very hard time getting in, if at all. And people would stop us in the street. We're so obviously tourists and foreigners, and cry and say, take our case back to your people. And it was even more profound in some ways because we were there as Jews, as American Jews. And people would stop us, Palestinians would stop us, this like living memory, and tell us about how in their villages where they had lived before, inside 48, they had Jewish friends and neighbors and business partners, and there was an incredible disbelief, dismay, and pain, and a great sort of welcoming warmth for us, which was unbelievable, given what was happening. Unbelievable. Anyway, so that is another presentation. Today I'm just going to talk about the work that I've been doing, and I'm only going to focus on the work in the United States, actually, with this art organization that I direct, which is called Art Forces. Can everybody see? What would be best? Should I sit down?
Yes.
I'm afraid. Oh, okay. I'm afraid to touch anything. But this is a mural that I painted over. How much time do I have?
Like
10 minutes. Okay. 12:28. Can somebody? Will you give me a little sign? Because when you get close, I can. Okay. When you get going. Because this is a mural in San Francisco on 23rd Street between Mission and Cath, and you can see that I call this is like the, all the people that were on America's Most Wanted list, all these rehabilitated terrorists and stuff. Now the greatest story about this is that when I first painted it in 1984, there were not as many people on the mural, but that's another story. But Leila Khaled was in the mural from the very start.
Yeah.
And then in 2004, there was a new ownership in the shop here, and they wanted to restore the mural, and they found me, and I said, yes, I would love to do that. So I wrote a grant to the city of San Francisco. So I just want you to know that the city of San Francisco paid for me to restore the portrait of Leila Khaled and all these other people, which I found very satisfying. So the great thing about this mural is that you can call the wall and hear. So in terms of education, it's an on the street listening station. So there's a map here. It's not in this picture, but there's a key and a phone number and extension, so you can call and hear Emma Goldman speak, which was very exciting. A minute or two, and then if there wasn't an original audio file available, we found something and had somebody read it. So Leila Khaled talking about flying over Palestine. Now this mural, so this talks about the audio files, and so it's on a website, on the Freedom Archives website. This is, thank you. Once again. This is the key, the mural key that's on the wall, and you can download it. And on the Freedom Archives website, another wonderful organization that you should know about, you can also access the files. But this mural actually was very severely, let's say, beaten up. It was attacked sometimes in 2001 after so much happened in 2001. And there was a lot of backlash against Arab people in the world and in the Bay Area. And so I had added a portrait of Rachel Khury, who was run over by a bulldozer in 2003 in Gaza, to the mural, and her face was repeatedly smashed, which I'd never have experienced that. I've been a muralist for decades. Graffiti, very rarely actually, I have to say, but this kind of thing was I've never experienced this before, and the city of San Francisco wouldn't call it a hate crime and on, but so we kept repairing the mural, and it has not been treated thusly since. This is a mural that is in Oakland. It's the Oakland Palestine Solidarity mural, and there were several organizations that put it together. NorCal Friends of Sabeel, the Estria Foundation, Art Forces were the main organizers of the mural, and it's no, in San Francisco, in Oakland, sorry, Bay Area, Oakland, in downtown Oakland. And this also has an audio file. So you can call and hear, this was the opening, you can call and hear all the artists. So this first one was Nidal El-Kari, and he's a Palestinian who grew up in Jordan. And you can call and hear how he came to this image and what it meant to him to paint it.
Could you back up a little so we can,
You want me to back up?
towards the door?
Sorry.
So we can just get a quick
Your
look at the whole-
shadow.
Sorry, you want me to sit? I can sit. I'll try and
But if
sit.
you sit, your back will be.
But then I'll do this. I do yoga.
Oh, okay.
We do a little.
Michelle can do I'll stand here.
Yeah, right.
It's better if I do it because I'm a little idiosyncratic. Yeah. And the
Does
next-
anyone
the next
have
one
a
is-
clicker?
The next one is Irat, who's a graffiti artist, Native American, who lives in the Bay Area. And then we have Vile One, who's a very well-known graffiti artist from LA. He's part Native American, part Mexican. And then the next image is by Emory Douglas, Minister of Culture for the Black Panther Party, and who was on a delegation with Rabab last year. And then we have Chris Ghazala, who's a Palestinian American. The next one is Erin Yoshi, Japanese American artist. And then Dead Eyes, African American artist. And then the next one is an Asian American artist named Spy, graffiti artist. The trapeze person is my contribution. And then the one on the end is an artist named Dina Matar, who's from Gaza, who's not able to travel for all the reasons because of the occupation. And so she sent us images, and we painted images for her on the wall. So you can call the wall, and if you want, and it's written on the wall. And hear from each artist, and we want to expand that to make it a much larger and involved audio-visual program. And then
Susan, could you just tell us the dimensions?
yes, that's 30. That one is 20. That's 22 feet by 57 feet.
Wow, that's huge. It's like the wall, but the opposite. Yes.
Thank you.
Great.
Very quoting. And then we wanted to keep the space active. So a lot of times, in my experience as a muralist, there's all this energy around painting a mural, but then after that, nothing happens exactly. So the mural is there and it changes the space, but I wanted to keep all that energy alive somehow. You know, all those people coming together. So we had a series of events in a venue across the street, which was worked out very, very well, and on the street itself. So these were called Off the Wall. And these are just some examples of some of the events that we had in the space. This is a group called Young, Gifted, and Black, a local group in Oakland who are amazing performers and bring everybody to tears on a regular basis. And we had Debke dancing in the street. This is Al Jathor, a local Debke dancing group in the Bay Area. And one of the things about this is that we really had to take over the street, which, even though it was a small gesture, was a gesture. And then we had tango dancing in the street. This was Revolution is Love. It was Valentine's Day a couple of years ago. And a photo booth. And this is a mural that I painted when we got back from Palestine the first time in 1989. We painted this mural in the mission. And this is when I first met Rabab, by the way. And it's been a long time. And so this mural was like the first mural of its kind, talking about these issues. And it was very beloved, and the community took care of it, and if it ever got graffiti, they would clean it. And all of these images, I don't have time to go into now, but reflected different things about our trip and who we met. The first time I was there was, we lived in a refugee camp for 3 months, and I've been back countless times. It's really something I've been very involved with. So what happened was in 2001, the mural started to get very severely attacked. And people were throwing gross materials on the wall that would take an entire weekend to clean, and then they'd come back and do it again. And then these very scary people, these Zionists, were going to the owner of the grocery store and asking for Sabra and Shatila liquor, for example, which was very obviously threatening and scary. And he said, look, I can't handle this anymore. So what we did was we covered it up with wood. And we had a press conference and talked about why we were doing it and, you know, the circumstances. And the mural is still there. And the idea is that one day we will uncover it when the world is a better place. But this was, again, the city would not put it into the category of a hate crime, would not do anything to protect it.
How long has it been covered?
Since 2001. Yeah. This mural will be spoken about more in the next panel, but just as an introduction, this is a mural that is at San Francisco State University, and it's the first mural of its kind in an academic setting. And it really almost did not happen because of the backlash and the attacks of the Zionists in the Bay Area who threatened to cut funding to the school, and they have managed to do that in the past. So it's not an idle threat by any means. And there's an ongoing history of these kinds of behaviors and attacks. So the mural is just one piece of that. But so there was a protracted struggle, and at the end of the day, a compromise was reached where we removed the symbol of Handala, who's by the cartoonist Najal Ali, and who's a very, very popular figure. So for those of you who don't know, it's a little cartoon figure with his back to the viewer with his hands behind his back. And the idea is that he'll continue to grow and he's able to return home to Palestine, 48, i.e. Israel. But so these were symbols that were considered too threatening to the Israeli state. And then there was also a key that said Auda, return, in it. And when those And after a long struggle, and when those images were removed, we were able to put up the mural, which was organized by us, by the students at San Francisco State, and I was asked to be one of the artists to execute the mural along with Fayek Awais, who's a Palestinian artist, and but really it's the students who were driving it. I just was honored to be part of it. And yes, 2 minutes. Okay, I'm going to do this really fast. This is a mural in Olympia, Washington. This is 35 feet by 100 feet, and it was inspired in part by the killing of Rachel Khury in 2003. She was 23 years old and run over by a bulldozer in Gaza as she tried to protect the home of a Palestinian pharmacist. And so there's over 200 participants. They sent us images where some people were able to paint directly on these leaves, which are about 4 by 8 feet. And so this again has, this is Quit Queers United Against Israeli Terror. It's one of my favorites. And they're protesting Victoria's Secret. Okay. And then this is the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network. These are just some of the organizations that, this is Anarchists Against the Wall, an organization inside 48, and then there's, again, an audio program. You can call the wall and hear about all of the different participants in the mural. And this is the latest project that I'm working on with the Arab Organizing and Resource Center, AROC. And we're working with Arab youth to paint this mural in Clarion Alley, which is a small alleyway that's covered with murals and gets visited by more than 200,000 visitors each year somehow, unbelievably. And so this will also have an audio program, which hopefully will expand into much more than that. And these are the portraits that are going to be in the mural, and that's the translation of the poem, and that's it.
Where's the alley?
It's in the Mission in San Francisco between 16th and 17th and, 17th and 18th and Mission and Valencia. Clarion Alley Mural Project. And that is the end of
Thank you very much, Susan. Very interesting things for us to be thinking about, and particularly, right, this idea about using art as a way to teach, and the living, the speaking of the wall. So hopefully we can pick up on a few other points, and also the story of the mural when we get to the conversation part. But now we're going to move on and hear from Khury Peterson-Smith, who is part of Black for Palestine and helped to co-author the 2015 statement, which many people might know about. And you...
Thank you. Hi, what an honor to be part of this really incredible program. And can everybody hear me okay in the back here? Oh, we
Turn the light back on.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
you see me. If I stand up, that'll help as well. Let me just close at the beginning that on this discussion about teaching in Palestine, that it was actually a high school history lesson that introduced me to Palestine. A really good lesson, probably the only lesson I really remember from high school. I should say, I guess it's not accurate that it introduced me to Palestine. Rather, it introduced me to the Palestinian people and the Palestinian struggle, because I had been introduced to Palestine via Israel years prior, also in school, and by virtue of having Jewish friends in my personal life. And so I'll talk a bit about that lesson, but that was my introduction to the struggle of Palestine, struggle for Palestine. Since then, I've become an activist for solidarity and the liberation of Palestine. I've also studied education and taught children and adults. So I'm speaking here as an activist, as a student, and as a teacher. And I'll just share that I think that many of the elements of good organizing are shared actually with the elements of good teaching. That's my opinion. So, and as that kind of introduction, my experience as a student, as a teacher and as an activist, is a way of saying, please forgive a number of personal anecdotes that I'll share that I hope will communicate something. Though I think you'll see that I think that personal anecdotes are actually very good when it comes to teaching. So I have a few points. The first is what in education, the importance of what we in progressive education call differentiating instruction. or just the understanding that different people learn differently. And there's any number of ways to communicate something. Or as history typically or kind of traditionally is taught through a list of dates and facts, and that can be important. Using art and other media is also important. And so I want to talk a bit about visualization as a method for teaching, and that was central to this lesson that I had when I was in 9th grade. I should say this was a 9th grade global studies course, and we were on our Middle East unit, and the teacher began class one day by saying, "Today I'm going to tell you why the Palestinians are so pissed off." And it was just one lesson, but that lesson really changed my life. And he showed us the series of maps that I think will probably be familiar to everybody in the room. It showed us maps from before 1947 of Palestine, map of the UN partition plan proposal in 1947, a map after 1948, and then a map after 1967. And the maps themselves tell a story about ethnic cleansing and dispossession and racist violence. And I think, so the story itself is powerful, but the medium, which was one of visualization, I think was also really powerful. And as a teacher, I've used maps as well. I think there's something very accessible about maps that they can communicate visually and spatially. I remember, for example, teaching a lesson to 7th graders about the ethnic cleansing of this country and about the Trail of Tears. And I gave them all maps of the United States and gave them towns that the trail of that Cherokee were forced to kind of march on, and said, okay, plot out this trail from Georgia all the way to Oklahoma. And there was something that not only, there was something really accessible about a map versus a block of text. And as important as literary skills are, there are all kinds of ways to, all kinds of forms to see, and accessing maps is one. And so that's a powerful one that, in my experience, and one that's powerful in my teaching experience as well. I'll share another quick story from when I was working in a classroom of 4th and 5th graders. I live in Boston. And one day a student came into class and he had read in the newspaper on the way to school about how Israel had been shelling a beach in Gaza. And he came in and he said, "Hey, where's Gaza?" And I said, "Oh, well, here, let's grab the atlas, I'll show you." So we went and opened up the classroom atlas, and Gaza wasn't there. And it just wasn't labeled at all. I said, "Oh, that's strange. Here, let's look at the globe." And so we looked at the globe, and similarly, again, there was no mention of Gaza. And from then on, I started paying attention to maps in a different way, and in particular maps of the Middle East in the way that Palestine is represented. And in the United States, I've never seen a map that says Palestine. If there's any mention of the Palestinian territories, you'll see this thing that you don't see elsewhere on the world map or on the globe, this kind of dotted line that demarcates where the West Bank and Gaza is these occupied territories. It may say they occupy Palestinian territories, it may say West Bank and Gaza, but that's kind of on half of maps. A lot of maps just don't have any mention of Gaza or the Palestinians at all, which itself is a lesson that I got to talk about with that student. Okay. My second point is about, the first point is about visualization in teaching, and the second point is about storytelling in teaching. I had the opportunity in 2009 to travel to Gaza on a peace delegation as part of, people may remember or be familiar with George Galloway's Viva Palestina series of delegations to Palestine. And I went on the one in July 2009 that was from the United States, the second one, the first one being out of Britain. And when I came back, I gave a presentation at my trip in Boston, and a number of friends were coming to see me speak. Friends who were not particularly interested or knowledgeable about Palestine, but they wanted to come out and hear me speak. And I thought, oh man, I have all these people who don't know anything about Palestine. What am I going to do to kind of introduce it to them and frame it to them? And so I ended up going into this kind of boring history lesson. I mean, where I was kind of going through these various dates and individuals and it's all important information, but as I was giving this presentation, I could see the eyes of the people in the audience glaze over. And it was as I started to talk about the trip itself that people became more engaged. And when I was talking to a friend about the whole event afterwards, she said, Khury, the presentation was great, but I wish that you had told more of those narratives, and you didn't have to go into all the dates. And that's when I realized that there's something really powerful that can come through, actually, in narratives. And so after that, I started talking more about the experiences that I had in the delegation, meeting students at Islamic University in Gaza, chemistry majors who said, I was partway through my studies and then our chemistry lab was destroyed by Israeli bombs, and so I wasn't able to continue my studies and I'm stuck at the moment. Or the experience of riding through a neighborhood in Gaza City and seeing all of these houses that were riddled with bullets, but there was one in particular that had kind of a tile mosaic of the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. And the house had, that had that mosaic had bullet holes all around it, but the Israelis who had driven through in tanks in the invasion had targeted that image in particular of the rock. That in particular was shattered by bullets. And it says something about what this invasion was about. It's about if the Dome of the Rock represents something to Palestinian people, it's about saying, this doesn't belong to you. And that really being what this invasion is about. I told people about the experiences that we had. We went to Gaza via Egypt, and actually most of the trip was us being stuck in Cairo because the Egyptian government, then under Mubarak, wouldn't let us into Gaza. And there would be all these kind of false starts where we'd get the word in the morning that said, oh yeah, you're allowed to go, drive to Gaza today, just wait for our final okay. And so we'd kind of load up our medical supplies that we were bringing into Gaza and wait, and then the final okay would never come. And we would, at the end of the day, would say, oh, sorry, once again, maybe tomorrow you can go. Well, one of the times that they did that, they told us, we, the Egyptians, are willing to let you go to Gaza. The problem is you have to check in at the U.S. Embassy. The U.S. Embassy wants to talk to you. And so those of us who were U.S. citizens went to the U.S. Embassy, and we were forced to sign this statement that said the U.S. State Department has an advisory against traveling to the Palestinian territories. This includes journalists and aid workers, and you need to sign this statement showing that you understand that should you go to Gaza, you are relinquishing your rights as U.S. citizens to consular support. That is, something happens to you, don't call the U.S. Embassy. Well, that communicates a powerful lesson about the relationship between Israel, Egypt, and the United States, actually. So the point is there's a number of things to be gathered in these anecdotes. I'll just say one last thing, which is about the experiences of Palestinians who were part of our delegation. About half of the people who went on this trip were Palestinians, many of whom were from Palestine and immigrated to the United States, and others of whom were Palestinian Americans who grew up in the U.S., and this was their first time going to Palestine. And I remember talking to a friend, Arwa, who was visiting family in Gaza, who she'd never met before, at a place that she'd never been to before. And she told me about eating plums from her uncle, the tree in her uncle's front yard. She said, Khury, I never tasted anything so sweet. I think that communicates something as well. So my last point is about connecting Palestine in our teaching with historical and contemporary situations. When I was kind of coming into an awareness of Palestine, the activist discourses that I came into really focused on how Palestine is this exceptional situation in the world. That is, where in the world today do you hear about settlers, this kind of outmoded form of colonialism? Now, I think it's really important to talk about what is unique about Palestine. But I think more recently, there's been a shift, or we're in the midst of a shift, that also frames Palestine in terms of what it has in common with other questions of injustice and struggles for justice around the world. And that's why I believe, for example, that the analogy with apartheid is so significant, particularly as somebody who grew up at a time when apartheid was still alive and well in South Africa, and for my parents who they didn't know much about international politics, but they knew about one country, and that was South Africa, And when we would go to buy sneakers, my dad said, we don't buy from this company because they work with South Africa, and here's what they do. That country represented much of the worst of what black people have experienced. And so to draw an analogy with Palestine, I think is very important because there's a commonality there as well. And truthfully, by which the restriction of people in general were developed in Palestine by Israel, which has really, which prides itself on mastering different methods of controlling the movement of people, right? And they openly share their knowledge with the United States, with Europe, with Australia, and so on. And so we need to make those connections as well. And similarly, if we're talking about, people are rightly in this country and around the world outraged about the prospect of building a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border, and expanding the existing wall, by the way, then again, we have to make the connection. You show there's another and again, the Israelis have said explicitly, we are going to offer our expertise to you, U.S., in the building of your wall. And so if our enemies, if the powerful can make the connections, then we as activists and as educators have to make the connections as well. So let me conclude by saying that there are, I just think that it's important to note as organizers and as educators in the classroom, there's any number of ways of entry points by which people can access the question of Palestine. Again, when I was kind of learning about Palestine, I learned about it, and this is, I think, the dominant framing of the question, is one of, the question of Palestinians is embedded in a relationship between Palestinians and Jews, or Arabs and Jews. It's the Arab-Israeli conflict, and so on. Now, of course, there's an important set of relationships between Arabs and Israelis and Arabs and Jews and so on. But there's any number of ways to access the question of Palestine. And so, for example, while the question of Palestine was critical for my whole sort of radicalization and development of a worldview, what I didn't know was happening subconsciously was I think that I was processing the experience of what I was learning about the Palestinians, my own experience as a black person in this country. And I came to learn, along with people who were in the Palestine Network, but actually there's this whole rich history of black Palestine solidarity that well predates this moment. So that's one connection. The connection of refugees, the connection of all kinds of people, migrants and others, whose movement is restricted and so on. There's so many ways to access Palestine, and we should recognize that in our teaching and our organizing. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Leila, for that presentation. And I was going to we'll have the discussion afterwards, just to draw a couple of things together now before we move to the next presentation. It's interesting, both Khury and Susan kind of credit partly their work in delegations to Palestine and experiencing, and actually this morning, right, we were talking about that too, Raz, so, you know, that both kind of that experience of doing that, but really then sharing that experience and teaching that experience and coming to, you know, back to different communities and working with that, I think is really, it's really great to hear people doing that work. And just on that, I was just going to do like a minute of saying thank you for teaching in a school, and thank you for teaching young people, and for pointing to Palestine on a map, because it's one of the things as a parent, my son has religiously, when he gets his maps at school, goes through and looks for Palestine. Also crosses off the Israeli flag. We had a lot of like, yeah. You know, but it is, but you know, we were talking about that, and it is important, right, for children, and you know, the work that we do with children, and how we connect the work that we do as adults to the work with children. I think it's really important. So thank you for being a teacher. I just wanted to say that. I think it's on this. But you know, it's, you know, that public art, you know, kind of just bringing like these different ways that we can think of teaching and bringing messages, you know, out. But and I also wanted to kind of underline a point there about reframing the question, right? You know, which conversations are we going to put at the front of our teaching? So I think both in the work of the mural and who are the different people who are represented on the mural portrayed together, who's portrayed with Leila Khaled in that mural, right? And also, Khury pointing out, remembering when you're thinking about boycotting, remembering boycotting South Africa, even if you were probably a bit younger than some of the rest of us. Those are really important connections to make, and they also help us reframe our narratives and reframe what we're doing and how we're doing it. So on that note, I think we'll turn to Rabab Abdulhadi, professor and senior scholar at San Francisco State University. Yeah.
Thank you all for being here. So I'm going to pick up a couple of things from the earlier panel that we talked about. The panel was a documentary that was made by Ahlam Muhtasab and on the Nakba, on the history of Nakba. And we basically, and this is what Michelle is talking about, Professor Raz Pichasky had just come. That's better.
علي صوتك رباب.
Playground voice. It will come up, It's Raz had just come back from a delegation to Palestine, so I think that's actually really important to think about where we are. Where do we start the conversation? At what point do we start teaching? And where do we go from here? I also want to just remind us that it will be the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration on November 2nd, 2017. And in order, we are marking the occasion. We are doing all these protests and so on at the same time. So this is part of where the colonialism begins in Palestine. At the same time, we're also talking about teaching Palestine. So we are presenting something productive that we can do. That Palestine, as we talk about the victimization of the Palestinians, we're also not presenting the Palestinians as hapless victims who are basically either non-present at all, completely erased from the equation. So there's Palestine without the Palestinians. Or they are being saved as a charity way, or in some way, or as an exceptional, unique way of doing it. So, I've said this so many times before, so I'm not going to harp on it, but I do think that it's really important to think about Palestine in the people speaking for themselves, being able to articulate their own concerns and so on, and to think about it in a productive way. So I'm going to just say a few things about some of the stuff also pick up on. I love the fact that you say Tamim crosses Israeli flags. When I was little, I used to cross King Hussein's pictures from the books, and the headmistress would always call my parents and say to them, she's impolite. She cannot be like total, I would never have excellent in behavior. It was always very good. Because of that, she was really upset that. But we were taught when we were growing up that King Hussein and his grandfather were collaborators with the construction of the Zionist project in Palestine. So, I mean, he was on every first page. So I always crossed it out and I made things on it or something. I think this is some of the stories that I can think about. The other thing that I thought about is when we're talking about what do we do as teachers, it's also to think about Palestine as a project of the pedagogy of the oppressed. So we're talking about the co-learning process, and that some of the stuff that we're talking about here, when we talk about art, whether we're talking about the film that is made by somebody who actually finished the studies and said, what is going on? I don't understand the Nakba. Once I know about the Nakba, now I know what's going on. By all of us, it's a question of co-learning. It's a question of actually thinking about all the ways at which Palestine can be taught and Palestine can be raised as a way, and it's not the only way, but as an example of what is going on around the world within the framework of the indivisibility of justice. The connections, not reducing everything to the same, because not one struggle is the similar as the other one, but to basically connect with each other and talk about that. The next thing I was thinking about is, so to whom do we teach Palestine and how do we teach Palestine and which are the audiences? And I'm going to leave the whole question of whether we are talking about the uninformed American, average American, and so on, like to later on, and because I think this is a bigger discussion that everybody needs to be participating. And I don't want to take from my time to do it. I think we should unplug it. Okay. I have been teaching my course on Palestine. It's called actually Palestine, because when we were started talking about this project, we were looking for places where there is a course called Palestine, not the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, not the Arab-Israeli conflict, not the Middle East conflict, not something about the Middle East, not women in the Middle East, not women in the Arab and Islamic war, none of this, just Palestine, like really centering Palestine. And there is a course at Birzeit University called the Palestine Question. I think there are a couple of courses at different Palestinian universities, but we don't see courses called Palestine, like Palestine as Palestine. I actually designed it in 2000 when I went to teach at the American University in Cairo, and it was for the Forced Migration Refugee Studies diploma. And they were saying, you're a Palestinian, you should teach about Palestine. And I was actually resisting because I didn't want to be boxed in a particular way. I wanted to be a scholar. I was just finishing my graduate studies and so on. And then I ended up teaching the course. It was called Refugees and Exiles, Palestine from Nakba to Oslo. And I taught it there, and then I taught it again. I couldn't teach it at NYU when I was a postdoc for obvious reasons. It was also post 9/11, 2001. But I also taught it at the University of Michigan Dearborn when I was the director of the Center for Arab American Studies. And it was very interesting because it was my last semester. And the dean kept asking me, are you going to teach this course? Or are you going to go to San Francisco? I said, no, I'm going to stay one semester. I'm going to teach the course. It becomes part of the curriculum, then I'm going to go back. And there was always back and forth, and it always ended up being at the bottom of the pile somehow. I mean, I pushed the paperwork and then it disappears. It kept disappearing, and I know those of you in the academy know, or none in the academy, how stuff sort of somehow disappears. So it goes to the bottom of the pile, and all of a sudden it's only bureaucratic issues. And so at San Francisco State, I offered the course, and it's called Palestine Ethnic Studies Perspective. It's actually, and why is it called Palestine Ethnic Studies Perspective? Because we don't teach Palestine. This is part of the Arab and Muslim Ethnicity and Diaspora Studies program that we've started. We do not teach Palestine, and we do not approach Arab and Muslim communities through an area studies. So we do not do with the Middle East studies perspective. So Palestine is just over there, and we have nothing to do with it. So we just go look at the people, study them, and then we come back, and we have nothing. We are uninvolved, we are uncontaminated. We're just actually innocent bystanders who are watching what's going on and passing judgment, just like somebody who's watching Gladiators or a peanut gallery, if you will, in a popular kind of way. We actually talk about engagement. So we don't do the Cold War framework. What we really do is kind of link up all the issues together. So when we teach about Palestine, part of the things actually I do a history of the United States. Since 1492, I talk about the whole question of the colonization and the whole question of manifest destiny and the question of kidnapping and enslavement of African people from their homes and I talk about the Chinese exclusion. I talk about the Palmer raids and all of the stuff, the repressions, the concentration camps of the Japanese. I mean, you cannot talk about Palestine without actually comparing it to other people, without being reductive again. So there is limitations of comparative studies, but also comparative is really good because it shifts the minds of the students. Instead of thinking that, okay, this is bad and US is bad, and the US gets contaminated by Israeli involvement as if the US itself is innocent and everything is fine in this country. And if we just get rid of Israel, everything will be okay. It's not true. And then we spent about like 3 or 4 weeks actually talking about the history of the Jewish people, specifically the pogroms and the anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe, and how did Zionism rise? How did Zionism emerge? And what happened, and what other tendencies within the Jewish communities were there to address quote unquote the Jewish problem as kind of the Jewish question, as Marx called it the Jewish question. And then there were different variations, like Herzl came up with one, which is the Zionist, which won. Okay, but then the Bund had a different kind of the Bund is, and it's going to be the 100th year of the Russian Revolution in November as well, which is something really important. So there were multiple tendencies among different, so we actually talk about all of this. I don't have enough time, but we spent like a month talking about it to kind of make sure that we are demystifying what is Jewishness is, and what are the Jews, and who are the Jews, and what is going on, and talk about what Israel is as a very racialized systemic settler colony. I mean, that is actually very oppressive to Jews of color, to Jews, and I'm saying Jews of color, I know it's a US framework that actually does not apply in Israel, because people say Sephardic, Mizrahim, Ethiopians. I mean, people have different terminology and so on. It's not necessarily the way in the US that Jews of color, which is a group that emerged out of Jewish Voice for Peace, and they say we collaborate with Jewish Voice for Peace. So they're not actually part of the Jewish, but they are. Some of them are members. But this is kind of like the discussion that came out, especially around the movement for Black Lives, because of the attacks in the world. But I'm not going to go into that either. But we talk about that. We talk about how do we think about asylum seekers, the African asylum seekers in Israel, and what is the relationship between the African asylum seekers and the Palestinian refugees? Because a lot of the time people get excited to only talk about African asylum seekers. So this is kind of, again, the divisibility of justice, not the indivisibility of justice. How do we talk about that? How do we talk about the treatment of the Ethiopians? And how do we talk about that among Palestinians as well? But that is a discussion. I'm not going to be having discussions about what the Palestinians are doing and how they are studying and so on. That's our discussion for Palestinians in Arabic in a different time and place. I'm not going to do it here in an American audience. It's a different kind of space and time for it and so on. I can discuss why that is. So we do that, and we also, the program that we do is we definitely talk a lot about indigenous communities, and one of the things that I've been arguing for quite a while and writing about is that it is really a problem for Palestinians to compare the Palestinian Declaration of Independence with the U.S. Declaration of Independence. The Palestinian Declaration of Independence was about liberation. The U.S. Declaration of Independence was about confirmation of settler colonialism in the United States. So July 4th, 1776 is actually May 15th, 1948, not November 15th, 1988. It is not. And I think, so it's really important to think about, not to think about Thanksgiving and this whole notion. And so actually I put on my syllabus Thanksgiving. And sometimes people say, why you say Thanksgiving? I say, I'm sorry, I'm contesting this. I have a serious problem with it. We need to understand all of these issues. So there is kind of like a way, systematically, that we are challenging ourselves and our students to do this. The program we are doing also is that we talk about multiplicities of Arabs and non-Arabs with an Arab majority. So we speak about the Amazigh, the Kurds, the Armenians, the various ethnic and racial minorities within the Arab world. We speak about non-Muslim and Muslim majority. So we talk about Jews, Christians, Yazidis, Zoroastrians, atheists, all sorts of religiosities, Baha'i, that within Muslim communities and so on. And finally, we are, in terms of the program we do, is we have actually courses aside from the Palestine course. We have a course called Comparative Border Studies, Palestine and Mexico, which we've actually got approved back in 2010 or 2009. We have courses on Islamophobia, but we also have courses on colonialism, imperialism, and resistance. So it's not about Palestine only, it's about Vietnam and Algeria and Puerto Rico and Mexico and the United States and all of this. So then Palestine becomes part of this, understanding it in that kind of context and so on. We have designed, and I'm going to maybe Susan can comment on this, but we actually designed 2 specific courses, specifically because the next year is the 10th anniversary of the Palestinian mural that Susan co-painted, and which she showed it to you, and it's a big story. And we designed one course called the Palestinian Mural as Act of Resistance, which Susan had played a very, very big part on. We submitted to GE, and it's been approved now. And we also designed another course on Edward Said. So we have several courses, but we have other courses as well that are part of it. And this is in order for us to be able to give an offering that make ourselves relevant. Also to the students, we are a public university, students don't have money, they have multiple loans and so on. And I think it's really important to understand the socio-economic and political economy of the context in which we work. So in order for us to be able to understand what does this mean, students bring up a lot of things to the classroom. They kind of like bring in things. And the last thing that we actually have been doing is the whole question of oral history. So oral history is a very big part of us. We have a project since 2007, which we started in Michigan, called Mapping Arab Diasporas. And Mapping Arab Diasporas, and that's reminded me when I saw the mural that you're beginning to paint. The new Mapping Arab Diasporas. And it's actually about activism. It's not a tabula research. It's not, even though we can talk about the appropriation of falafel and hummus and maftool and taboon and all of this stuff by Israeli chefs now, because this is the cuisine. We can talk about that, and it is part of another area of like teaching. But we are talking about how communities basically survive their context and how they organize themselves to challenge their context. So we had a workshop in San Francisco in 2007, and one of the people who came to speak was the name of Sheikh Abdullah. Sheikh Abdullah he passed away, Yemeni worker, who actually was involved with the Cesar Chavez farm labor organizing committee. And he spoke the story of Nagi Dayfallah. Nagi Dayfallah was a martyr who was martyred defending Cesar Chavez. Now, if you look at all the films of Cesar Chavez, if you look at all the history, it's never there. It's completely invisibilized. Like nobody knows that there was a Yemeni worker who actually got beaten up by the thugs defending Cesar Chavez. And this is very interesting. So it led us to kind of, so we actually have an oral history account of what happened with Nagi Dayfallah, because now Sheikh Abdullah passed away. He's no longer alive, but we have it from that workshop, from Mapping Arab Diasporas in 2007. But that led us to investigate what's going on with Cesar Chavez. And I know people don't like things to be raining on their parade, that if we say that a Gloria Anzalduwa was a Zionist, People don't like it. They get upset. I mean, reality is reality, okay? But compared with Gloria and Zadova, there's the Angela Davis and June Jordan and Adrienne Rich and Rona Copeland and Marilyn Young and Ron Baxendale. There is a whole bunch of, there's a lot of people who have been actually more people who supported Palestine. But what led us to investigate, and actually it turns out that Cesar Chavez broke, the Black Panther Party broke with Cesar Chavez specifically over Palestine. Because the Black Panthers were non-negotiable, unconditional support for the Palestinians. I mean, the whole Black Power movement. And it was maybe few people like Bayard Rustin and others that kind of like get flagged as this is the example of the dialogues between blacks and Jews, and actually there is a lot of more relations, deeper relationships, that there were a lot of Jews who were involved in the Communist Party and other leftover McCarthy. They were, I don't like to say blacklisted, I would say they were excluded as a result of McCarthyism. And so they were part of the movement, from the Shirtwaist Triangle Factory to Emma Goldman to the anarchists, to a whole bunch of people were like involved throughout the history. But we get this presentation, so when we're talking about it, we also need to revisit the history of the United States too. The history of civil rights movement, the history of the Black Power, the history of how people struggle, because we would not be able to understand what's going on today. We would not be able to understand what happened with Ferguson, how Michael Brown got killed and what Palestinians did and so on at the same time, of course. Muhammad was killed exactly at the same time. We don't want to be able to understand that movement for Black lives or the International Women's Strike or all of this. Why are Palestinians involved if we do not understand all these other histories? So in order for us to teach Palestine, it really has to be within a framework of the indivisibility of justice. It won't work any other way. I mean, it may last a little bit, and it's easier to do it other way. It's easier to say to people, do you like these illegal settlements? And people say, of course I don't. And now to present all the people who are the Israelis are zealot, crazy people who are going to kill Palestinians and so on, but then everybody in Israel is fine and nice and civilized and wonderful. Just like Shimon Peres, who loved the opera and high classical art and so on and so forth. That's not the reality of the matter. It's the same way that people are now revisiting the history of the United States, removing statues from New Orleans of the slaver. Not like, I don't even want to say the South or whatever, the slave owners, the people who were justifying the plantation economy and slavery and so on. And the same way that Georgetown and so on are actually confronting their past. This is really very important, whether we do it here. So one of the things that we think about is not to have different compartments of our brains. There is one aspect that talks about Palestine, then we go in another room, and when we start talking about racism, the third room we talk about police protection, another place of sexual harassment on campus. It doesn't work. It doesn't work for us to do that. It segments us in too many different parts. And it actually doesn't work, because everybody's going to be asking questions, and every single time you end up being defensive and you engage in Operation Olympics. And Operation Olympics doesn't work. So I want to argue for actually a much more complicated framework than just asking for BDS, than just holding Israel to the international law, even though I think BDS is wonderful, we should support it and so on. To kind of like really do the intellectual work. We are in the business of producing knowledge. That's what we do. That's the only thing we do. We're not in the academy because we make money. God knows, okay. We are with the corporatization, which will be discussed later on. There is less and less things available to us, and there is more work to be done, and we are expected to dumb it down, actually, because students who are supposed to be the consumers, and we are the customer relations, don't like too much exams, don't like papers, don't like research, don't like this. So I've been actually challenging myself to kind of like think about how to do assignments in such a way that make it possible for the students to engage day in and day out. Every single day there's more online courses, like I'm teaching online courses. How do we do that? How do we engage students in such a way while keeping their minds perky all the time, like always, always. Every time they get comfortable, you send them something else to make them uncomfortable, so they can think about again and again and again. At the same time, not making it so difficult for them to be able to finish the classes and graduate. So it's a tall order. And I think, but if we are focusing on the question of indivisibility of justice, and I want to also argue for that, you said fairness or whatever, we're in the business of the universities and the colleges of education said produces citizens. Do we produce docile citizens, or do we basically produce people who are going to be challenging and changing the world? I mean, at the end of the day, we are at the left forum. I'm just reminding us that we are here in a space that is supposed to actually talk about change. And this is the part of the educational system from Dewey down. Everybody talk about education. This is what education is about. So it is not exceptional to Palestine. It is not that everywhere else we talk about everything else. And when it comes to Palestine, we have to present equally, with equal validity. That's not even the worst. What I think the worst part is that whenever Palestinians are oppressed, you have to have another story from Israelis who are equally oppressed. It doesn't work. There is no equal oppression. It doesn't. It's not work. Colonizer and colonizer is not. So we really need to kind of like think about how do we do it in such a way without actually feeding into a revived anti-Semitism or anti-Jewishness and so on, with keeping all our students to stay and ourselves to continue to stay in the indivisibility of justice and to continue to stay human and support politics as well.
If I can pick up on that last point about the fairness and the two sides and thinking about the teaching, and one of Rabab and I have been working on a couple of different things related to teaching Palestine, both here and in professional organizations that we belong to, including the Middle East Studies Association and the National Women's Studies Association. So we've been talking about these things in a few different contexts, and so in one, you have to write lots of those little abstracts and so on, right? So in one of them, they have to be this many words and that many words. And in one of them, I pulled those up to prepare for this, and we had something about our teaching and being accountable, and how do we hold ourselves accountable. And I can't remember what the phrasing was for that particular one, but I was thinking about, well, what are we accountable to, right? Like what do we hold ourselves accountable to? We can hold ourselves accountable to certain communities, to a struggle, or we can define that in different kinds of ways. And I was just thinking now that idea of holding ourselves accountable to something like keeping justice indivisible and not kind of scattering those concepts around. I was going to pull together a few other things as well, since my job is to be an active moderator. I have to say, I noticed on the program for that forum there was a presentation about the revolutionary black auto workers in Detroit and their strike. And when you said the thing about Cesar Chavez, which is a history that I don't know, I was remembering that in the film that was made about Drum, there's a section about the Yemeni auto workers that joined in solidarity with the black workers in Detroit. And again, all of these histories, well, those groups are not part of what we think about when we think about the history of black people in the United States or Black Power, any of those important struggles in this country. So that came into my mind, and I was also going to come back to the point about the film. Right? So in the first session today, one of the two filmmakers said that one of the reasons he made the film is because he did an MA in Middle East Studies, and then that's Andy who's opening the door for you, who can't get into the film, and didn't kind of get it, right, until the end of his studies, right? And sort of, right, at the end. And then went and kind of undertook this project to make a film with Ahla Muhtasab here, who's doing our live stream, about 1948 in order to get into a deeper understanding and a better understanding of what the Nakba is and was, right? So, if we're going to talk here now in this next, half hour that we have, thinking about teaching and bringing a message and doing this kind of work. So we've seen a bunch of different kinds of examples of ways that people are doing some of that work. So I teach literature. So I was going to ask if we can actually hang up this, and I can write some books down on board. Because we started making a list of books and resources, and just now talking, of course, I want people to go and read more novels, but so Susan Abdulhadi, we talked about her book Mornings in Jenin, but her book The Blue Between Sky and Water has a scene that almost reproduces your friend's experience on your delegation of tasting the plum in her relative's house. And so that second novel by Susan Abdulhadi is a story of a Palestinian American woman who kind of decides to go back to Palestine, give something back to the community. So it's a very long and complicated story, but she goes through this whole process of being an outsider and an insider and experiencing that moment. So I was going to mention that one, and I wanted to also mention two books by Redwa Ashur, because we talked a little bit about this morning, Deir Yassin, and then it touched on the massacre in Tantura. And Redwa Ashur has a novel that's been recently translated called The Woman from Tantura, in Arabic Tanturiya. And it's a story of a family, one person, but then the whole family, who experiences that massacre and scatters. Their family scatters to different parts of the world. And it's a really beautiful novel, and it has been translated.
Is it OU or Tantura?
I think OU. And another one by Redwa Ashur, these are all my ones that I think are really useful for teaching and for reading, should be coming out in 2017, is called The Journey. And this is Redwa Ashur's memoir of her life, of her journey to the United States as an Egyptian feminist activist to study African American poetry at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, just as they were setting up the W.E.B. Du Bois Center there. So she kind of recounts her kind of just journey, and then also her involvement in literary studies and political activism in the 1970s in the United States as an Egyptian, and kind of connecting those struggles. So some of those things that we've just been talking about, have some literary.
Can I just add something about that? Radwa she passed away. She was one of the leading figures in Arab opposition in the Arab world, like leading intellectuals. So she was really very, very well known. So it was a huge loss her passing away. So the kind of like this is also one of the stuff that she was doing.
It's really important. I mean, and so I'm just going to mention those two because, like, again, I'm a literature professor, so I can sit here and talk for the rest of the day about her novels. But she has a number of other novels. You just Google her, and most of them have been translated, and that last one is being translated now. So I think that's a nice person. But to come and kind of pull back together some of the things that we've been talking about, I thought maybe I'd ask people to comment a little bit before we kind of just open up, or we can open up and bring some of that together. Yeah, and then come back. Okay, that sounds good. I was going to ask if people wanted to talk a little bit more about the oral histories and the idea about stories and narratives and dates and documentation. So we talked about this morning in relation to the film. So this film both takes stories and it puts them together with documents, right? That's part, it's a documentary film, that's part of what it does, right? And this morning, Ahlam and Ali talked in really interesting ways about how you put those together, how you verify one with the other, doing that kind of work. And I was wondering maybe if you all would also like to say a couple of words about that. I think, Rabab, for example, the idea about needing to have your story kind of verified by somebody else's story for Palestinians. Somebody else has to be the one to verify it. What, if you two want to speak, from whichever perspective on the idea of, you talked about how powerful you find stories. So how do you put stories together with other kinds of information? What do you do when you're doing the artistic work and so on? If we could talk about that. I wanted to know if you would also talk a little bit more about what happened with the mural, the 10 years of the mural that is that they made the course about, the mural project. Just a little bit, if you could talk a little bit about that, and then maybe coming back to you again, Khury, if you could talk a minute about that idea about people learning things differently. If you have any thoughts about that, and the sort of how do we think about how do we maintain our commitment and our accountability to those things that we want to stay firm on, like something that I feel really strongly about, right? So when I teach, I use certain kinds of language, I teach things in certain ways. I don't teach Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I don't teach Israeli literature, I don't teach the other side, I don't teach two sides, and I say it on the first day of class, bless you, and get lots, and that's where the, that's the argument and the feedback and the pushback and, all that happens, but, but I feel like it's really an important thing to do. So like, we all talked a little bit about this, like how do you do all of those things really practically at the same time that that you're acknowledging that people learn things different ways, as well. And so like where can you be flexible and where can you not be flexible? If people wanted to talk a little bit more about that. Should we start?
Sure.
Should I take even more questions to save time? Okay.
Yes, you should.
Okay, so we'll put a couple. All right, take notes, you guys. Let's take a couple of more questions as well that we can put so that people could speak together, and then we can follow up with that. Or not?
No, there's a question.
Could you say your name? And
Sure, Dan. I just had a general question for Khury. Right? You were talking about the U.S. Embassy and that whole experience. I was curious if you researched all of the U.S. doing that, like other times, ever in general throughout the world, as far as the U.S. Embassy just saying we won't help you anymore. Is this the only time this ever happened, or have you ever done any research?
I didn't look into it.
Okay, just curious.
I'll add that, I don't know if this addresses your question, but in the situation between Egypt and Gaza, it absolutely happens all the time. I also had to sign that.
Yeah, I guess I'm just
Yeah.
curious outside.
But outside,
of
yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Gaza, Palestine, has the U.S. ever done this before?
In the back and then in the front. My name is Carol Marsh, and I was also on that delegation with Roz and Kathy sitting there and Bonnie who was sitting there. And I'm just really interested in that question about balance. I mean, I have some thoughts about what to say when I go around and give my presentations, which I will be doing at some point. So I just wanted to add to that concept.
Sure. Okay.
In the front.
Oh, my question was, it was when, in terms of public art, and really how public art and activist art is being affected by gentrification in San Francisco and the Bay Area. I mean, art is also being used as a form of gentrification, but I was wondering how it affects activist art. And the other is, how does, my other question was, how does the repression against this type of work, talking about Palestine and repression on college campuses affected the work that you do?
We have a whole next.
We will have
That's the next session.
So,
It's a whole
we can maybe touch on it, and then we have
many
like
other
2 more
questions.
hours to behind.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, because I know you're going in the direction like just teach on Palestine, but it's been kind of interesting how Mizrahi Jews have reframed as Arab Jews the entire view of looking at the Arab world in Europe and trying to decenter Europe in the process, and in fact create a framework of U.S., Israel, white supremacists, then moving to settler colonial countries and moving from that and opening the discussion, and they're like, have blown a lot of kids' minds when they teach these workshops, which start out about Islamophobia and lead into this. And I was wondering what you all think of that.
Should we take this one in the back? Okay, go
I
ahead.
just wanted to follow up on actually your excellent point, connect that to something that Rabab ended with, which is how to teach the story of Palestine without falling into or being sort of read as anti-Semitic. And I think that's one very powerful way in talking about this phenomenon of the Arab Jew or the racism within Israel, so that you're not talking about Jews per se. You're always about a particular Zionist entity that is racist.
Oh, I didn't know I had my hand up, but I was very taken by the murals. Brought me back to all the murals on the wall, which are extraordinary, and some of them are solidarity murals. The Chileans saying, "We are here with Palestine," or the hunger strikers in Guantanamo, "We are with you in Guantanamo, we are with you in Pelican Bay." All of these solidarity, and then the Haisha refugee camp, all the murals of the prisoners, of the martyrs, the wall and the mural as a form of expression for people who are oppressed and don't have other media to use. I mean, they have the internet, yes, they have paper, but this is a form of expression of resistance. And I just see a direct link between San Francisco and Palestine. I think it's wonderful.
We can support it.
Oh, we can turn, if anybody doesn't want to be close, we can. Susan, do you want to make some comments? And we can come back around to the other.
One of the things, the first one that, I don't know if that was really my question exactly, but I was interested in about verifying stories. And one of the things about the murals that I'm most excited about now, because I've been doing it for so long,
this whole thing that I was talking about taking it, really keeping the spaces alive and taking the murals off the wall, is having a way that one of the things about murals is people come upon them, so they have their own life. But I wanted to expand that moment where a viewer comes upon a mural and make it more clear, have more very easily accessible information about how the mural got to be there and what it's about and what the context is. So, so in other words, having the story in Clarion Alley. So I want to get that oral history from you. Where people, now there's this app that I'm trying to figure out how to work with, and I live in Tech Central now, so as in the Bay Area. So there's no shortage of resources, that where somebody just walking down the street, it can pop up on their GPS, like just a place of interest. So here's this mural, a place of interest, so that really it can reach people in my dreams, really, who are unsuspecting. That's one of the things that happened with the Oakland Palestine mural, is that there would be First Fridays, and people would come through not at all expecting to see images of the Nakba or films or extraordinary things that took them by surprise.
And doesn't explain what First Friday is.
First Friday, sorry. It's like a festival, street festival, every Friday in Oakland, in downtown area, and it's part of gentrification. But and there's it's contradictory. There's some good things and some bad things. But it is about the neighborhood completely changing and the tech infusion of Google and Facebook and et cetera, et cetera. So, which have their pluses and minuses. So, thousands of people come to downtown Oakland and just to see art and be entertained. So it was a way for us to kind of, infiltrate or subvert that moment with a different kind of experience and history and engagement that has much to do with colonialism and a critique of imperialism and etc. with Palestine as the lens, but which I don't think I made this clear as you all did, that the Oakland Palestine mural is about putting these different struggles together in one place. So the black struggle, the Native American struggle, that we're very clear that in Oakland we're on a lonely land, and that the history. I just gave myself chills. It's so intense what's happening. That's not the most articulate statement. But anyway, so I have more to say, but maybe that's in the interest of time.
Just to say, but we have a question from one of the people watching. It's actually Imam Taha Hassan from San Diego, from Abu Bakr Mosque. He's asking the panel to emphasize or clarify differentiating between anti-Semitism and anti-occupation, and he thinks it's very important to kind of flush that out. We have audience from San Diego. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I will talk about that. Let me just say just a couple of points. One is that the context in which we organize and in which we teach really matters. And it's important to kind of take stock of it. So the question, for example, about a current conversation, I don't know if it's a new conversation, but a current conversation among Mizrahi Jews or Jews of color, like that is, that conversation, that outlook, the way that people who are leading that conversation are identifying, orienting themselves politically and so on, is related to Black Lives Matter, which is a contemporary phenomenon, or the way that we talk about indigenous people in this country. I think that for a long time, even on the left, there was this notion that, the genocide in this place, the ethnic cleansing of this place is already complete, that indigenous peoples are essentially gone and so on. And that was never true, but in recent years, most notably with the I Don't Know More movement in North America, across North America, and then Standing Rock, along with a number of other struggles at Oak Flat in Arizona and elsewhere, there's been a reassertion of among indigenous people, we haven't disappeared, we have not been ethnically cleansed completely, we're here, and so on. And that is combining with a conversation that I think has been inspired by Black Lives Matter around the foundations of this country, the foundations on slavery, ethnic cleansing and genocide, and so on. So all of those things matter. They shape the context in which we organize with people and shape the context in which we teach in the classroom, because these things are on the minds of people. So it's this notion that there's this kind of uninformed American or this disinterested American, I think it's really a fiction, actually. And it becomes clearer as, all those things happening politically in the world and in this country at the moment, I think, point things in favor of those of us who want justice for Palestine and justice in general. It's actually, on one hand, it's a total nightmare what's happening in the world, but the questions that people are asking and the bases on which they're asking it lend themselves to identifying with the struggle of displaced people, of people who experienced racist apartheid, of refugees, and so on. And I think that it's actually the notion that Americans are uninterested or that this is controversial, it's being challenged as actually the institutions that have been most adamant about squashing conversation about Palestine on campus and so on are not, it's increasingly not students as much as like the state of New York and university administrations, the same people who are repressing Black Lives Matter and so on. So I just think that context is really important. And on that question, I just want to say a word about anti-Semitism. Of course, there's any number of ways to address this question. It has been addressed in countless ways, and it will, I'm sure, in the future. But at the moment, we have anti-Semites in the White House, right? Like, for a long time, the way that the Anti-Defamation League and other organizations that supposedly are interested in matters of equality or discrimination or whatever, the way that they've approached the question of anti-Semitism is not only racist and Islamophobic, but I think it actually does a disservice to a conversation about anti-Semitism. That is, when you publish a list of anti-Semitic acts that took place this year, and you list on the same list, graffiti at a Jewish cemetery and a showing of Occupation 101 at a university campus, that's actually diluting a conversation around anti-Semitism if we want to take that seriously. So all of these people who for so long have been talking about the new, sorry, I'm so worked up, who've been talking about the new anti-Semitism in the form of the Palestine Solidarity Movement, okay, we've got anti-Semites in the White House, so where are you at? Alan Dershowitz? Like, why aren't you mobilizing the resistance against Trump? Because you're white supremacist, exactly. The state of New York, which says, oh, we have to pass anti-BDS legislation because that's the new anti-Semitism. Well, what are you doing about, so this is a threat, really? Students for Justice in Palestine? College students talking about Palestine, that's a threat. Yeah. Not the white supremacists in the White House. Not this wave of very explicitly Nazi-identified anti-Semitic attacks taking place across the country. And the more that plays out, the more it's evident which side people are on. And it's clear that, Students for Justice in Palestine and other Palestine Solidarity organizations are on the side of oppressed people, which include Muslims and Jews and Black people, et cetera, and then, others are on the other side. So I just think that that's an important part if we're going to talk about anti-Semitism honestly. The last thing I'll say about context.
Yeah. Saying something that I asked the mic. So I think also to just follow up on what both of you were saying and Michelle as well, and the earlier conversation. I think also the whole question of the Anti-Defamation League equating people who are calling, first of all, SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, is not just made up of Palestinians. Maybe half of the membership are Jewish anyway. So it's kind of like, even that, covering about and not talking about it, that's actually quite problematic. But also what Anti-Defamation League and other major Jewish organizations, that the problem is that they say that they are speaking for the Jewish community. And they're not speaking for the Jewish community. There are multiple voices in the Jewish, and that in itself is anti-Semitic to actually say all the Jews have one voice. Everybody thinks the same way. That's stereotyping. That actually doesn't work the same way that you say all Muslims think the same, all Arabs, all Palestinians. No, there is multiple views and so on, but we kind of really need to invoke it everywhere. It also excuses when people use these anti-Semitism in order for them to launch more attacks. So for instance, this young Israeli kid who called Jewish community centers and made a hoax, and he's living in Israel, Why is that not being held accountable? Why is that? This is really a problem because you know what the Nazis are going to say and you know what the anti-Semites are going to say. They're going to say the boy that cried wolf. And you cannot let that happen. You have to expose that and you have to say there is a very big difference between the attacks on the Jewish cemeteries and the desecration of Jewish cemeteries that are the same as attacks on Muslims and so on, but they don't get played as much. We know that, right? And we know the power structure. But it really needs to, so I don't believe in any credibility for Anti-Defamation League, American Jewish Committee, American Jewish Congress, Council of Presidents of American Jewish Organization, JINSA, even JSTIC. I don't believe. I do believe that Jewish Voice for Peace is right on. I do believe International Designers Network is right on. I do believe Jews of color are right on. I do believe Jews Against Islamophobia are right on. There are multiple, historically there have been many more organizations who spoke against Zionism and anti-Semitism and against oppression of the Palestinians among Jews in the United States than there were not, okay? And that history is hidden. And that history needs to be visibilized and need to be brought up. I'm going to let you and then I'll come back to the other questions.
Yeah, but it's so, because I think it's really, yes. All right, but it's like these organizations that are out named who have organized rallies in solidarity with Israel, whatever that means.
Tomorrow, go to the protest.
You know,
yeah.
Where are your rallies about what's happening in this country at the moment? I mean, again, if you're so concerned about anti-Semitism versus organizations like Jewish Voices for Peace, which at least in Boston organized a march in solidarity with Muslims.
In New York too.
Okay. In that context, talked about anti-Semitism, but started actually with our solidarity with Muslims. And I think that's just as organizers, I think it's critical to advance the politics of solidarity, which say that when one of us is attacked, it makes it easier to attack all of us. And as educators, if we're honest about history, historically, when the powerful go after or discriminate against one group of people and get away with it, it is easier to discriminate against other. That's the whole history of this country and
of the world,
elsewhere,
and
of the whole world. Exactly. So, and just on that point, I want to just say a word, and this will be my last word about this question of objectivity and balance and so on. And you know, I'm lucky to not only have gotten to go to Palestine on a peace delegation, but I got to go to Iraq on a peace delegation as well in 2004. And and there also met people who said, tell people where you are, tell them what you saw here, tell them what you learned here, tell them the stories that we're telling you. And I remember talking to this young Iraqi woman about that task of going back to the United States and talking about what I saw. And how, you know, something that I wanted to do, but that I was nervous about it. And she said, what are you afraid of? You're only telling the truth. And I hold on to that, because as educators, we have a responsibility to our students to tell them the truth. And the fact is, if you're trying to present a balanced view of Palestine, it's not only inaccurate politically, it's not true. It's not a balanced situation.
Balanced view is the truth.
Confusing yourself.
If you look at things objectively, there is no Palestinian wall on Israeli land. There's no Palestinian checkpoints that Israelis have to go. There's not a balance.
There's no symmetry.
There's no Palestinian nuclear arms.
Right. So the world is imbalanced, and if we're describing it and teaching it accurately, then this is the view that that we've got to communicate. And I think again, what's happening at the moment in this country provides, I hope there's a kind of unsettling of this whole notion of American objectivity and balance. And I'll just want to give one example. With Black Lives Matter again, there's this absurd rallying cry of Blue Lives Matter, in response to Black Lives Matter. Like, well, what about the police and their lives? And it's like, what Black Lives Matter is doing.
Power imbalance.
Well, it's power, but it's not even. I mean, Black Lives Matter calls attention to the experience of an oppressed group of people. Police aren't an oppressed group of people. Police didn't come here on slave ships. There's no history of the oppression of the police. It's not an analogy. You can't have Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter and that's balanced. It's false. So, take how that kind of false approach to balance and apply it elsewhere. And I think if we're educating people about Palestine, for example, and we don't tell people, students, if students go through university and they don't know that the historic demand of Palestinian peoples to return home, and that Palestinians say we were ethnically cleansed and forcibly displaced, we're not quite doing our duty as educators. You know what I mean? Put aside the question of being a Palestine solidarity activist at the moment. You're not actually teaching accurately about this historical and contemporary situation. So now, that said, it's one thing to acknowledge that truth and then to actually go and do it. And we know the struggle there, and we'll talk about that in the next session. But I think that that's got to be our task. And so just on the last thing is, again, the context in which people are kind of students come into the classroom with, or the people who we encounter as organizers come with. And there's so many different ways to kind of access this set of stories. And you know, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention in this city that there's this massive gentrification happening here in New York City. Mm-hmm. Now, is that exactly like the ethnic cleansing of Palestine? No, of course not. But are there connections to be made in terms of what people are experiencing? I mean, there's this discussion of gentrification at the moment in the U.S. that, on one hand, there's a discussion of it, on the other hand, I think it downplays it, minimizes it. Like, well, gentrification is like a bunch of hipsters drinking lattes in Brooklyn or whatever. And it's like, it's actually gentrification of the gentrification of New York City and of the Bay Area, my goodness, is this incredibly violent process. Mm-hmm. That's right. Incredibly violent. The gentrification in this city was really I think we have to talk about what Giuliani did in the 1990s and the wave of black people who were murdered by the police to make Harlem safe for its new inhabitants. So there's a connection to be made, and the assumption that people are kind of coming in, I think this goes back to Paulo Freire, that people are coming in, as students are coming into a classroom as blank slates. It's simply false. There's a connection in our experiences and in our minds to be made with the question of Palestine.
Just a second. Imam Taha says, very well articulated and explained things.
Thank you.
And then he says, justice in Palestine, Black Lives Matter, Native American, standing around.
I just Marla raised a very important question about, and I want to address the whole question of Israel. Actually, part of the teaching on Palestine and all the courses, not just teaching on Palestine, we always teach about the experiences of Mizrahi, Sephardic, Jews of color, Ethiopian, however people define themselves, because it's very important to bring that. So it's kind of like there is a group called Afro-Palestinian Community Center in the old city of Jerusalem, but that's not the only experience about racism in the context of Palestine and Israel. And actually, I think just teaching about that doesn't cover. So we actually talk about the Sephardic Jews. When we talk about 1492, we use the work by Ella Shohat, we use the work by a whole bunch of people. This is something, and it's not one name. This is the thing, it's not just one name, so we're only raising a token. We talk about multiple experiences and everywhere. So if you put these things in the syllabus throughout, then you are not just teaching about things only one time. Only when you talk about anti-Semitism, that's when you talk about the Jews in Israel who are white and Ashkenazi and privileged and middle class and so on. No, it's actually part of normalizing the diversity and the multiplicity of people's experiences across time and contemporarily as an antidote to the question of normalizing Israel, as making it okay in the United States, as an occupation which has historically worked in the movement. I just want to say a couple of more things. I think we really need to set up a curriculum committee. We need to see people who want to set up curriculum to kind of like add it to the task. So after this, people may want to be part of it. Susan was actually one of the muralists. This was called the Break the Silence Mural Project. They painted, and when people go to Palestine, they'll see inside the walls all the beautiful paintings that they paint.
Yes, and just if anybody's interested, I have this case for support with information about all the projects that took place in Palestine and in Lebanon.
And then just one more thing, I don't want to talk about campuses because it's going to be next. But Standing Rock, actually, we're going to do a teach-in here, part of the teach-in today. But we had a big teach-in last night at the Berkshire Conference on Women, Gender and Sexualities, which is online. It's going to be streamed online. You can hear it. And Madonna is speaking tonight. Madonna Thunderhawk is going to speak here at the Berkshire Forum tonight at 7. So
and also, if people are interested in the Berkshire, the panel and the plenary yesterday, they are available online. I could give you the link on Facebook.
Maybe we
we'll.
can add it to this link as well.
Okay,
And
I'll
add
try.
this link to that
Okay,
so people can see.
sure.
Just one thing about language. When we're teaching, we want to be conscious of language, and we're starting to rethink our language and be self-critical about our language. Apartheid is not an analogy, it's not a criticism of you, but it's a literal fact. Occupation is no longer occupation, it's annexation. It's taking over. It's not just occupying, it's stealing. I think even the word occupation has problems. Ethnic cleansing sounds like cleansing, cleaning. It's not cleansing, it's removal, it's expulsion, and I think it's genocide. Security, the rationale of security, we have to challenge it at every step. It's not about security, it's about takeover and supremacy. They don't have any reason to feel for their security, feel afraid, except some deep psychological pathology. So I think we need to, as part of the curriculum development, we also develop new language and discourse.
Thanks a lot for that comment. I mean, it's sort of where we started, so it's nice. It kind of brings us around into the circle for teaching where like literary people like that, kind of, you know, kind of wrapping up like that. But really, and thank everybody a lot for participating and for being here, and to everybody who spoke. Thanks a lot for all of the really great interventions. And I want to encourage everybody to come to the other. There's two more, right? Two more panels, and they're in the same room? Yes. Yes. So everything in the same room this afternoon, and that tomorrow in the morning at 10:30 there is a flyer going around that they are doing a is this the Israel Day Parade? Yeah, so there's a counter demonstration to New York's Israel Day Parade is very, very large if you've never been to it. So there's going to be a counter demonstration organized by Jewish Voice for Peace.
There's going to be a lot of activity in that parade.
Okay, so have a look at this flyer. But I've also sent around a sign-up sheet for people to stay in touch with this group. So if you didn't sign up, it's loading. I just saw it.
Yeah, please sign the sign-up sheet and send it over here. Don't hug it. Where is the sign-up sheet?
Thank you.
Everybody sign the sign-up sheet. If you haven't.
Thank you, our online attendees.
So much to say.
There's going to be...
Yeah, here.